I think in heaven, God loves us, things that look very interesting.
That's
Explain.
that's why we're not going now.
I'll go back and look.
So the first sheet's actually the kind of the whole metaphysics, and it's easier because it really tells us how we got to where we are in terms of the wrong-minded setup. So the second sheet is actually the right mind, and the right mind actually, the culmination of it will be going back to, are we short a sheet?
Yeah, two of them. Three more next week. Oh,
Oh, no, but not correct,
Right.
Mom was holding out.
you've got one under the chair, I think. Yeah.
She can get one.
Hang on, here's your second sheet. There it is. Where's mine?
Everybody,
We're good.
everybody got their drinks? And there's
No, I've been a long
snacks.
meeting then.
How the fun it
Ready.
and our infants. So the second sheet is kind of the right-minded look. And the right mind actually will culminate in the atonement, so we'll go over that a little bit later. So back to the first sheet. Yeah, the confusing thing about this, just to be very clear, is that this is complete abstraction. There are no bodies here, there's no time, there's no space. This is why it's so hard to kind of represent this, because it's way beyond what we as dualistic people can imagine. Because it's beyond words, because words involve duality. You know, the letter A is different than B and C and D, the is different than and, so everything here is dualistic. Our thinking is dualistic. Me thinking about something, me feeling something, okay? So when we really, it's really difficult, but it's really important to kind of at least appreciate what is meant by non-duality, because if you don't, you fall into this trap of, this is where God loves me, like traditional Christianity in heaven, okay? Because this heaven is not kind of a congregational gathering of all the saved, happy people, and then God kind of dishes out his love. It's not like that. There is no God and me. There is nothing other than God. You could take out the word God altogether, you know, which is why up there it's love, peace. It's beyond describing. It is non-dualistic. There are no two parts. There's not God loving something else or something else loving God. And even when we talk about the Son of God, we're only using that because we have a dualist experience here, and we have to kind of talk about it in terms of dualistic terms. But you want to stay away from the notion that here is where you get loved. Okay? And we as bodies have nothing to do with this. This is also why the Course is an atheistic teaching, because this is only where God is. There is no world here, there are no people here, there's no soul here. Okay, this is beyond time and space, and this is all that exists. There's no fear because it's just one thing. There's not a different part of it that can come back and attack it. There's not a different part of it that can stand there and judge it or have it judge back. It is one singular entity. Now, for the sake of teaching and to kind of explain how we got from here, because if you have non-duality, it is impossible to have duality. And from the perspective of duality, you can't have non-duality, which is why we always stumble on the question, who am I, how did I get here? And so the metaphysical teachings are kind of an attempt to explain how this all happened to where we wind up in this room. Okay. So we're totally outside of time and space, and this is all that exists. Now, for the sake of the story, the myth, to get things going, there is this notion, this idea, this tiny mad idea, that there can be something different, something other than love, God, non-duality. There can be something dualistic. So that introduces this notion of a tiny mad idea. But if you're talking about this is totality, that this is everything, this is the only thing, then what can be outside of that? Absolutely nothing. But the whole idea that there can be something different begins to introduce duality. So at this point, the Son of God then has to really kind of face this decision of, okay, I really have kind of two options here now. Heaven, the state of love, of non-duality, or nothing. It's not really a choice. And it's really, from here, indistinguishable from love. So the ego thought system, on your sheet, and one of the things to keep remembering is the decision maker kind of progresses and forgets where it came from. Okay, so the decision maker doesn't just stay back here. It gets actively involved, and the ego thought system says that you're thinking that there is something apart from God is a sin. It's a mortal sin. And the ego thought system basically just posits that you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. So that's where that comes from. The positive thing is that now it seems to really offer an alternative to love. Now we've got some distinction here. There isn't just this nothingness. I put in this thought system that says what I have done is sinful. I'm guilty now of completely obliterating love because there's no love here. And therefore I will be punished. So I introduce sin, the destruction of duality, non-duality. Duality undoes non-duality. And then I say that I'm sinful, I'm guilty of having done that, and so I should be very afraid. So this is where we really start to begin to see how the ego thought system, another word for that sin, guilt, and fear, would be suffering. And now because the ego thought system is all about splitting things apart, we don't just use the term guilt and suffering. We have other words: anxiety, depression, even minor upset. Okay? We'll go into that a little bit later. Now, this is really an intolerable situation for this decision maker, to feel this intense suffering, this intense guilt, and this intense fear. I'm not going to touch too much on projection right now, but we'll go back to the sheet and talk a little bit about the projection. So what the ego thought system does as a strategy is to do what it does best, which is to split, and then it splits its suffering, sin, guilt, and fear into two parts. So now, the decision maker sees itself as being afraid at the hands of the sin and guilt. Now, in this early stage of the story, this sin and guilt is subscribed to God. Now, it's the ego God. It's not the true God back here. But because the Son of God left God, the fear here is that God will do to me what I did to God. That's the projection, is that I obliterated love. Now God is going to do to me what I did to God and obliterate me. Pure projection. If I do it, God does it. Okay? And that's where we get into the whole thing of denial, projection, blame, that we'll see how it impacts things. So now the problem is that this is still intolerable. Now I've gone from suffering to being terrified. Okay? So the ego thought system offers another strategy. Let's turn this to make this clearer. Just separate this piece out here. So the ego thought system offers one more strategy. Let's take thought and turn it into form. So now it almost seems like I'm out of my mind where the danger is. Okay? So the projection now becomes form, and this is where we get the introduction of time and space. Okay? this is where we start to talk about a universe, and in that universe, in the world. Now, from the story being told from over here, we know that the universe is several tens of billions of years old, and the planet Earth has a history too. And then within Earth, there's the human history. Okay? Now, in the world, because now thought has taken form, this fear and sin and guilt, this splitting off, takes form of myself and others. And I am afraid, and again, other words for fear, mild upset to total rage, anxiety, depression, comes because of somebody else's sin and guilt. Now, we began to see that there was nothing. The ego thought system introduces this idea of you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. That then gets projected out. But to make it tolerable, it splits it off into two pieces. And that's where you get the genesis of a me and a you. My body becomes myself, and everything else is the cause of my upset. Now, what this has conveniently also done is two things. Made this seem very, very real, and this to completely be gone. It's a wonderful, brilliant strategy. But we've gone from pure abstraction to now very, very specific things. And as we talked about last night, the self, my body, everything else is an other. Bacteria, viruses, the weather, the economy, the politics, whether or not a field gets paved over by asphalt. I will use everything. The curtains are too opaque. They're not the right color. They're not the right size. They're not the right fabric. The carpet is too dirty. The carpet is too old. The chairs are too hard. The refrigerator isn't running well. Everything in the world has this sin and guilt quality, and that's how I explain why I'm so upset. I don't see where this all comes from. Any questions thus far? All of the forms simply act out, and now the decision maker has actually, and it kind of loses its words, but it begins to think now that it is here. Not really, because...
So that's when it over-identifies with the body?
Yeah. So the Course is actually not addressed to this. It's addressed to this. And one really needs to get to know where the decision is being made, because down here, no decisions are being made. The decisions have already been made. So there's no sense in trying to fix anything here, because this was all set up to get away from suffering, and then the fear that I made for myself, thank you, in splitting that suffering off into two parts. So when we talk about relationship, this is the heart of the relationship. No matter who you're with, this is true. So if I talk about Tom and Marcy, Tom is always going to be afraid of Marcy's sin and guilt. I don't see it that there's this thing that precludes Marcy and Tom. Now, from Marcy's perspective, I'm the sinful, guilty party because you are always here. And something else is always the cause of your upset. But it never comes from anything down here. Okay, that's why the Course is filled with these passages of the body does nothing. That there is nothing to fix down here. That if you're looking for answers here, that's the seek and you will not find. And this is designed beautifully because now you think you're a body, all about form, all about tangible, sensual experiences. And I don't mean sensual, sexual, romantic. Sensual as in 5 senses, maybe 6th sense even. Kind of an affinity for being able to kind of pick out energy fields. It's still about a body-based experience. And there is no sense that any of this happened before. So that's why it talks about your birth is not your birth, and your death is not your death. It is if you think that this is you, but this is not you. So the Course is simply this roadmap on how you got here so that you can then go back if you want to. This here will never, ever work. From here on, this is all illusion. This is where the Son of God falls asleep and dreams a dream. And in that dream, there are characters. And one of these characters is you. And in this dream, every character thinks that everything else is the cause of its upset. Now, this other can be my own body, or even more specifically, a part of my body. A rash, a broken bone, my brain. And along with that, there's a string of what made my body. Either God made my body, or my parents and their genetics made my body, or somebody else put something in the environment that mutated my cells. But it's always about blame. So the whole setup here is nothing, suffering to fill nothing, and then blame as the strategy to account for the suffering. It's a total getting rid of responsibility, which is why when the Course talks about the key to salvation is that you do this unto yourself, is to go back here and remember that your choice was between love and nothing. But you filled it with suffering and blame. You're the one that filled it with suffering and blame, therefore you can undo it.
But if the self and the other don't exist, and it's all made up, then how is it that people are experiencing salvation at different times?
Because this is all in play at the same time. Okay, we've set this up chronologically, but the only point at where there's chronology is down here. When you go back to this portion, it is instantaneous. So this, when he talks about you're playing old tapes, you're repeating a story that's already occurred. That's here. But you do have moments where you remember the truth of who you are, that holy instant. And that's on this second sheet. Okay? That's where the decision maker, for however long, and again, time here is irrelevant because in the level of mind there is no time. But on the level of mind, when the decision maker switches its choice and says, wow, this really is nothing, and I don't want to fill it with suffering, and therefore there's nothing to split off and be afraid of, then there's no suffering here, there's no splitting, and so what happens down here is now you just have bodies. Now one of these bodies still is called Tom or John, but because there is nothing to block the experience of love in the mind, this body only has the experience of peace. And it realizes that it's not a body, so whatever happens to the body is totally immaterial. Whatever happens on this level does not affect the peace, because the peace comes from there is nothing blocking my remembrance and experience of love. But when that happens, there really is no longer any need for this. Because really, when you stop and look at it, what's the point of this? What's the point of nothing? And that's where God takes the final step, because the only thing that has any value and meaning and significance is this experience here. But then, there's no decision maker. there's no experience of self, there's no consciousness, there's no judgment, there's no reflection. I don't mean judgment as a negative thing. It's that sense of power that I get to assign value and meaning to things. That experience is gone. There's not something that stands apart and says, wow, this love is cool. That's where we talk about, we want to be loved. We don't want to be loved. Okay? The birth of specialness is God recognize me. So that's that whole introduction of the tiny mad idea that there can somehow be something different than everything, something more than everything. And the only way that's possible is if I hallucinate. And my hallucination to be distinct from love has got to be everything that love's not. So it's got to be fear. It's got to be a sense that I've done something wrong. And that's why the ego thought system seems to solve the problem of the decision maker having to decide between everything and nothing. The power of the ego thought system is that it seems to give the decision maker an experience of self in now I really have a choice to judge between. My only problem is that this experience, this choice is intolerable. But the thing is that it's better than going back to here where I don't exist at all. So now that I've got this, my problem is how do I make my suffering tolerable? I split it off into two different parts. The part that suffers at the hand of this person who makes me suffer, or the thing that makes me suffer. And in the original story, the ontological story, it's the Son of God at the mercy of God. The Son of God saying, I left heaven because you wouldn't love me. And because this is all about denial and projection, then the fantasy doesn't come from God actually attacking the Son of God. It comes from the Son of God attacking the Son of God. Because remember, this all comes from this singular experience of suffering. Now, all that I have to do then is leave this intolerable, frightening place and make up a world. And if we really strip it bare, this world is a frightening place. Why? Because I've said there's something to be afraid of. And now, for all intents and purposes, all of this stuff is gone. And now I'm stuck. There's these sinful, guilty things out here that make me suffer.
So one could say that when we created this world to be a frightening place, that same way of the reversal is when we create the world to be a loving place.
No,
No,
the world never
then
becomes a
it
loving
never-
place. The
It just
world
becomes
is
a
seen
place.
for what it is.
Okay.
Now, without this medical physical explanation, then you're free to explain this as you want, which
Right.
we do. Christianity says that God will come back and restore his kingdom on earth.
Right, but I'm going to this model
Uh-huh.
just for, I mean, I get it, but I'm probably not saying it.
For there to be...
So it's that these bodies can still be, I mean, you said it really well when
Yeah.
you did the body and
Right.
the other bodies. And then there's Tom, but we're not there's Anthony and there's Tom, but we're not.
He's talking about B prime, C prime.
Mhm. So here's what that looks like then. The intermediate step between this and just this. And this is the teaching of the Course. This is what the Course offers.
To stay, I mean, because we're in this world.
Right.
Right, okay.
So what you want, let's go back this way. Again, when I pull these things out, now the mind of the decision maker is clear.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing here to suffer from. There is no suffering. And because there's no suffering, there's no need to split that into something that makes me suffer.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay? So since that prototype is totally gone, then there's nothing for that to kind of be actualized down here. So my experience down here then becomes that these are just bodies. I no longer identify myself as being here.
As victim and victimizer.
I identify myself as being here, and because there's no splitting here, I only see one body and another body.
And when you're there, that just melts away eventually, when you pull the
When you
blue-
finally make the full choice
Right.
and don't go back and forth between what's here,
Okay.
then this all just fades away because it's no longer needed. This was only needed as an option to get away from the terror of living side by side in my mind of this persecutory sinner that came from my splitting suffering into two different parts, the one that suffers and the one that causes the suffering. And I use the suffering to fill the emptiness of my thought that there could be something more than this.
And not to be dense, but, so one can be in this place without all those other levels. One can be in this place and be part of the love without being a victim and victimizer, or do you
Okay.
just leave this place?
Okay. If we do this, what's the point?
Exactly, okay. That's what,
Okay?
thank you.
Because this was made specifically to get away from the stuff here.
Gotcha.
Because if my mind is filled with suffering and pain, suffering and fear, which are both really intolerable to sit with, what do I need? I need a place to get out of my head, which is why this portion is called mindlessness. And in my state of mindlessness, I have left the source of where the problem can be solved. And then I play around with it, trying to fix this guy,
Mhm.
which is never going to get fixed because it doesn't come from here. It comes from here. So until this gets fixed, this is always going to be
Okay.
me versus you, kill or be killed,
Okay.
us sizing each other up, and me always suffering at your hands and you're always suffering at my hands. Because that's what goes on here. That's what is filled in the mind. When I remove that, then there is no suffering, no fear to need a world to get out of my head for. So this has no more function. It has no purpose. And if it has no function and purpose, it is totally meaningless, and let's just throw it away. Now I'm back here, and I don't want to do this anymore. So then I accept the fact that there really isn't a choice here. And I realize that my only choice is between love and this stupid experience of suffering that has no resolution. It keeps splitting myself into gazillions of pieces that keep attacking each other.
But why not just go back before the creation of form, when there's this illusion that, you know?
And stay here, in the mind.
Why not go back to the white sheets before the form got created? Because the form is the tricky part with all the illusions and stuff.
Well,
Right.
no, the form serves the purpose of getting out of your mind that has either the experience of suffering or fear.
Right, I understand that, but why, you said the universe, the form came
Right.
after this part. So why didn't we just go back before the form part?
Because then what you've got is suffering and fear. And if you don't have that, you've got nothing.
Oh, I think that, okay, so the choice was either, but I understand his question, if the choice, if you look at this fear and guilt versus nothing, why wouldn't we even choose nothing over fear and guilt? The opposite, we chose all the
How
opposite.
can you choose nothing?
How could we choose this?
Yeah.
Over
We
nothing.
did.
But you always hear people talk about that things are going along too smoothly. I don't like it.
Because when we chose this, we just distracted ourselves
Yeah,
from all that.
that's not to say that things can't get solved
Right.
here,
They can
but
be
they're
solved.
always ephemeral. It's like, I ate today,
Yeah,
geez,
sometimes.
I'm hungry again. I just took a breath of air, I just took a bath, I gotta take another bath. I just told someone I love them, now I'm not so sure. They just told me they love me, how come I don't feel it?
Mhm.
We just got Obama and the Democrats, now what's happening?
When you look just at the play from yesterday afternoon to today, and
Yeah.
how the spiral.
And, I mean, the nature of this, see, this is where this gets so crazy, but this is where the strategy is so brilliant. Here you have the experience of 100% total pain. This is hell. Total suffering, no relief. Intolerable, right? So I do the trick, the ego strategy of splitting, and I split it into two parts.
So would that step give me
And now
water
I've-
in the fire of hell? Or that step's giving me water in the fire of hell?
This is hell here. This is nothing,
Okay.
okay? This is just the physical manifestation of this. That's why they call it the metaphysics.
Gotcha.
If
Okay.
this didn't exist, and it's not a chronology, it happens instantaneously. Okay? If we slow it down like they're trying to with the origin of the Big Bang and parcel out the fractions of a second, yes, we can talk about, because the minute this happens, the Big Bang happens, you get a universe. Now, the beauty of the universe is that you have 100% suffering here on a level that is intolerable. And
Why-
then I've
why is that?
replaced it with fear.
I understand why you'd replace that with fear if there was 100% suffering. But why does leaving nothingness, why leaving God into nothingness, why does that result in absolute horror?
How are you going to distinguish this from this?
I could replace nothingness with somethingness.
Okay, and something, no matter what you put in here, what you've really done, for the sake of argument, is destroyed this. Because you've established duality, which then says, this is gone.
It's gotta be the opposite of that.
So this all of a sudden, if I think that there's a choice to this, if I establish duality, then non-duality is out the window. Now I'm hanging out here with nothing. But I can't go back to this, because then this is gone. You can't have duality and non-duality. You have to just decide between one or the other. So if I choose this, then I have to do something that says that this is something very different than this. And because I've already established by my definition that my duality destroys this, I've already laid the groundwork for attack and destruction. So now my fear is that what I did to this will be done to me. That's the sin, guilt, and fear story. And it's a total self-absorption, because it's saying that I'm so powerful and important that I destroyed love. And now, love is going to destroy. I mean, how could love destroy this? Love does not destroy. But because I've already set up that duality undoes non-duality, now my fear is that the revenge. And I've got my perfect revenge story. And that's where we get this feeling of suffering. I have destroyed my duality, removes non-duality. Now I'm stuck out here with nothing, and that's where you get the scarcity principle. I had everything, perfect peace, now I have absolutely nothing, and it's really hard for me to push out the fact that I destroyed love, because it's not here. Now the fact of the matter is there's nothing there. But because I've already put the seeds in for destruction, I go with that, because that satisfies my specialness, that yes, I am powerful. I am a force to be reckoned with. But now I'm stuck in another quagmire. What to do with this intense fear? Make up something, well, split it off. I'm not the one who's guilty. This other thing is guilty. And that's, again, where the second split occurs.
Now, someone that struggles with time
Mhm.
and chronology, is that when time becomes
Time doesn't come into play until here,
there? Okay,
because this is where thought takes form.
that thought, okay.
I did- This is also nothing though.
It's all nothing
No, no, I
except
mean
for
this-
this.
Yeah,
This is the only thing that's real, and that's why the introduction is,
nothing real can be threatened.
and nothing unreal
Exists.
exists. Therein lies the peace of God, because none of this has ever occurred. The atonement principle is none of this ever happened. That there can only be this, and this is your truth.
I was just thinking about this, because the lesson I had today popped into my head, which is let my mind not deny the thought of God. And it just kind of clicked that, well, what is the thought of not God? It's everything beyond that white sheet.
Yes.
It's like if you wondered, well, I wonder what the thought of not God is, and then it happened, you know?
That's what the Course means by mind wandering. You wandered from the truth of who you are into nothingness, and then you made a big deal out of nothingness. Where therein lies kind of the secret too of specialness. You make a big deal out of absolutely nothing. So Donna's statement is very true, that there's nothing here. I'm just making a big deal out of it. Why? Because that satisfies my craving for specialness. And if I can't have God's love, I'm going to throw the hellacious tantrum. Where do you think kids get that from? If I can't get positive attention, I sure as hell am going to get it through negative attention. There's the genesis of it. Look in your own life. All of us. I make a big deal out of absolutely nothing. I think that my existence here is somehow significant. You look at time, how many people have been on this planet, let alone anything else? Just people alone. How many people in Haiti just died? Does it really matter? Does it impact my life? No. But somehow I think that if I die, boy, that's going to change the universe. It's just total silliness. And we spin our tale of how significant and special we are.
And not
Literally
only,
down to the lint in our nails.
and not only if I die will that change the universe, but if I send money over to Haiti, then I can change the universe.
Yeah.
You know, 'cause there's children, I mean.
Right. Now, an interesting part of this also that's helpful is, now that we've kind of got the map and the diagram laid out,
You gotta work on that, Tom.
where is where's Jesus?
Fine.
Probably.
Find Waldo. Where is Waldo?
There's a stapler in there somewhere.
Shell trick.
I should put Waldo right there. Where's Jesus?
There's probably a song about that.
What would Jesus do? Where the hell is Jesus?
Well, would he be in
Jesus, where is
the
Jesus?
last? Would he
Jesus is
join
just
with
an
love?
Jesus is in your mind.
Jesus is an example of the whole
Gotcha.
thing. There is this body that we call Jesus. And for most of us, this is Jesus. Because Jesus is other. And therefore, Jesus is filled with sin and guilt. Jesus is the one that upsets me. That's why in the Course he talks about, you're going to have to forgive me. And forgiveness basically means that anything that you have split off from yourself means that you're going to have a reintegrating experience, and that reintegration is forgiveness. It's not overseeing somebody's sin and guilt. It's not taking your goodness and getting rid of your fear and saying, bless you, sweetheart, I love you anyway. It's the reintegration where these two pieces no longer look different. It goes back to understanding that the fundamental source of all of us is right here. Okay? So Jesus, there is this body in the dream, and for all of us, Jesus is the other. Now, Jesus himself the body, was this, but he didn't experience this. He experienced, I'm losing my body. He experienced himself as that, that in himself as this. Meaning that his experience was that because he had gone through the process and understood this is all there is. And ultimately, in the Course, Jesus' voice comes back from here and talks to the decision maker. Okay, so Jesus is infused in this process. He just isn't part of this. But he knows what this is because at one time he was down in this world as Jesus the body.
So if Jesus was down in this world, where's the Holy Spirit?
The Holy Spirit is simply this, the memory of this. And there's nothing to distract, nothing to... And that's why the Course talks about that this is a course in removing the blocks to the awareness of love.
But the Holy Spirit can transcend through all of that.
Yeah, that's why the
Yeah.
happy dream is this state, and that's why Jesus lived the happy dream. Wrong slide. Jesus lived the happy dream where he recognized, take this body, psychologically abuse me, accuse me of being a pedophile, a rabble-raiser, whatever you, accuse me of everything, and then take this body, nail it to a tree, please. There's no pain. There's no fear. It's nothing.
So he was a B1C1?
Yeah.
Okay.
And because then there was no sin and guilt, this is just a world of silly bodies, and it's totally meaningless. That's the happy dream when you get the reality of this, that it's nothing, meaning that it has no value for you, and it has no impact on you, because this is not you. And the only reason this came into existence was because you were too damn afraid to deal with what's in your mind. If you would deal what's in your mind, you wouldn't need this. Because this really is this. It seems to be different because of that ego strategy of changing thought into form. Which is why if you want to get in touch with your mind, understand the thought that is operating here. That's what the Course talks about, content. Not actions. What's the content? And the content is going to be what's taking place here. So that's also what it means by, now understand that a body has a brain. And that brain seems to think. I'm talking here. That's a body function. It's the brain firing off neurons from a trained body that has learned language connections and blah, blah, blah. It's nothing to do with thought. That's why the Course talks about the thoughts you think are not your real thoughts. Your real thoughts are right here. And they're only one of two choices. That there's either nothingness with love or this experience of suffering. That's all that gets played out here. Now again, we get very obsessed and preoccupied with this because the form makes it seem different. But again, that's why Jesus says the thoughts you think are not your real thoughts. This is also, again, why he talks about you're too tolerant of mind wandering. Down here, we brain wander. So the key is to understand that everything here is a symbol for what goes on here. If the form came from the thought, what's the thought that made the form? And so the practice of the Course is to constantly take the forms and trace them back to their thought, to their content. Because doing that will change your identity from here to here. And once we're back here, we can actually solve something. We can undo the thoughts that make this. We can't do it here. No matter how many dolphins you save, it doesn't matter. Because the entire planet is going to be swallowed up by the sun, and then the sun is going to shrink down into a cold, cold mess that will get sucked into a black hole, and then the entire universe will get sucked into a black hole. So what's the point of saving your dolphins? What's the point of arguing about abortion?
Because while you're going down that hole, you're going to feel a little bit better about yourself.
As George Carlin calls it, circling the drain.
Yeah.
Circling the drain.
And that's the key to this, is that it takes the 100% suffering and dilutes it here, so that this seems to have a tolerable experience. And that's the mindlessness. And we do. We take this experience of suffering, concentrate it, and dilute it across billions of years, astral bodies smashing into each other, molecules becoming disassembled, Ebola fighting bodies, roots fighting bodies, animals killing animals, water tearing apart stone. And we dilute the intensity of it so that this actually seems somehow tolerable. Except my specialness can never be appeased. Somehow, no matter how much money I get, friends I get, love I get, job recognition, academic recognition, whatever, no matter how poor I am, no matter how much I shed everything, I'm still somehow dissatisfied. Because my truth is back here. And I will never, ever be satisfied until I'm back home. So that's why this here is a matter of time. And it doesn't matter how many of these we go through. They're like Doritos. We'll make more. I had to plug our sponsor. But that's why, what he talks about, your body dying is totally immaterial. That's not where it comes from. These can come and go and not at all touch this. And the whole ego strategy is to ensure that this never gets touched. That's how the ego thought system maintains its existence, is that it never allows for it to be undone. You can begin to see where all the stories come from. The whole matrix story is right there.
Well, and religion's perpetuating to make sure you belong
Right.
to that.
And the religions are still trying to somehow make the body-based experience better, make the dream better, make this happier, shed the fear, shed the sin and guilt, always have peace.
But the religions still come from the body, from the self anyway, so religions don't just occur.
Now, religions are just as, where's the Course in this?
It's part of it, it's part of the whole thing.
Exactly. So it really doesn't, the Course isn't anything special here. The Course just gives you this map. But you can follow Christianity, you can follow Buddhism, you can follow materialism, you can follow family treeism. Because none of that's what solves the problem. Whatever gets you back here, whether it's the Course, whether it's the war in Iraq, nothing here is causal. Nothing here saves you, nothing here condemns you. It's all your own choice. It is literally, you get what you want. That's the frustrating part of the Course. Now we want to argue for him. Hey, I didn't ask for this low-paying job. I didn't ask for this crappy pair of jeans. I didn't ask for this flaky partner. We'll negotiate for him. Just to get away from the fact, it doesn't matter the form, the experience is exactly what you want. Now you're just trying to blame why you have that experience, rather than I make my own experience.
so I wanna go back to something you said earlier, because you just made me kind of see something in a new light. So mindlessness and
Mhm.
mind wandering, you kind of expanded my view of that. That's really pretty much all of our thoughts.
Yes. Yeah, because there is only one real thought in this whole thing, and that's the thought of God. It's the only real thought. So, the mind wanders away from that into the tiny mad idea, and then everything else springs up, and then I'm lost in basically brain chatter, which is like fuzz on the radio. But I find special significance in that. Ooh, look at the words that I just strung together. Specialness. That's why this course will never become popular, because it's not about anything here. Now, because we are believing that we're here, all of us, for the most part, come in trying to make this experience better. And this experience will get better. I mean, the end result is a body that's at peace. Unfortunately, it's not because of anything here. But the end result is, yes, we feel better, which is why Jesus' kind of whole pitch to the decision makers, try it, you're going to feel better. And remember that the Course seems to be addressed down here because that's who I think I am. But the Course is talking to this and trying to say, see what you did, see what you did. That's why the Course is all about look, look, look. Which is why the practice down here is to look, see how this lives this out. Because once you make that connection, it's not going to become desirable anymore. The only way that I can make it desirable is to ignore this.
When you make that connection, do you still see down this as the classroom, or does classroom just evaporate?
This classroom will be here as long as you think this is you, and more to the point, that you think this is you and this is somebody else. Because under that split lies this, that I suffer at your hands. That's unavoidable in specialness. That's unavoidable in difference.
Because there's no need for classroom and you're at the peace.
Right. Because now, this body's at peace, and it's not because I'm cancer-free, or that I'm immune to H1N1. It's because there's none of this crap here. There's no pain, there's no fear, so there's just this memory of this going right through, because there's nothing to block it now. And so regardless of who I hang out with, there's no sin and guilt in that person. They don't affect me. There is no fear here, because the fear has been solved here. Which is why Jesus wandered the world. And it's interesting because some of the Jesus stories say, and this is where the whole Shroud of Turin comes in, is that he actually, after the resurrection, he wandered around in Turkey and studied and did a few things, and then he died somewhere in Turkey. Yeah, the body just kept going. Didn't have any point. It just wandered the globe. But it was like a car without a driver. The driver already parked up here.
So that's when the lights are on and nobody's home.
Exactly. And because you know that's true with my body, it's true with all bodies. Because the only way that bodies become important down here is so that I can split off the sin and guilt from me. And I can dilute that suffering and terror. Now, when the other is a shark, particularly a great white, that's all the better. Because now we know who the guilty party is. And now we know why I'm afraid. I don't need this. Who wouldn't jump into an ocean with a shark and be terrified? But guess what? That experience doesn't come from here. It comes from here. Now that doesn't mean jump in. I mean, so you have Jesus. I mean, Jesus could have. But it'd be like, what's the point? I just got crucified, now you want me to get eaten by a shark? You know, it's like, you see the power of it though, the strategy behind it. It's a brilliant strategy. why it talks about that the ego is foolproof. It's not God-proof, it's foolproof. You can't fight the ego. All you can do is see that its genesis was self-made out of nothing by you. Not you the body, but you the mind.
There's a word that keeps popping up in the book lately, and it really fits with what you showed today too, is beyond. You know, it's like seeing beyond
Yes.
illusion.
Yeah.
That just, you know, keep telling yourself there is something beyond this,
Yeah.
what seems to be real. You know, I find that helpful.
And that's where you get transcendence, and that's where you get the enormity of this and the smallness of this. Which is why it's very common for people when you have not just a holy instance that's just kind of in and out, but a holy instance where you have it for a couple hours, if not a couple days. That people almost always describe it as something big and enormous, taking over me. And I have an experience of gratitude because it's definitely a sense of being loved. And all that is that the memory of this was not undone by this. So what you feel is that love coming through. And for something this small that is so into body-based phenomena, it becomes overpowering. But that's just reflective of the decision maker not yet ready to go back into it fully. It's appreciative of the fact, and the learning lesson there is this still exists. And I just felt it. But I'm not ready to go back yet. And so after a few days, that experience fades. And then I try to explain it, well, it was because I was at the foundation, or I heard Ken, or I was with some Swami, or I just was out with some really cool people, or I smoked some good weed.
Thursday
whatever.
workshop.
Because any of this here, if the mind is open to it, it's not this down here that's causal. And that's the mistake we made, is that we keep wanting to assign specialness down here. The Course is special. Christianity is special. Sarah Palin is special. No matter what it is, we assign the value down here. And it doesn't matter. Pick anything, because it has nothing to do with where the real power lies. And that's why he talks about you have no idea the awesome power that you have at your disposal. You have literally made everything.
But there is something that could happen down here that sets you back to, oh my God, I strongly remember that this is not true.
Yes, theoretically, this can be done in an instant. All of this can be just, boom, I don't want this anymore. And so that's where you get a Jesus story.
And again, in my awareness, there are masses of people that are coming to that conclusion, that are understanding this is illusory, and that the truth, because this is so difficult for us to get, that the truth of who we are not is beginning to fall away, so that all that is left is the truth of who we are. And so as much as it seems like a monumental task, there are certain things that, again, there is a huge population of people in my experience, in my awareness, that is very much what people are moving toward. This is illusory, it is not
This is
here.
not monopolized by the Course. It's not probably even originated by the Course. But because truth is truth, regardless of how you tell the story.
Right.
Because what am I thinking? Not metaphysics. Atom smashing. Not quantum mechanics.
Physics?
Quantum physics is trying, in the pursuit of trying to understand the basic reality of this, they have come to identify that it is only thought. That you take what seems to be solid and you break it down, and now, again, interesting enough, they're trying to look for this particle called the Higgs boson that is supposed to give things mass, that's supposed to give them substance, and they can't find it, and it's infinitesimally small. So the whole point is, how can something so tiny that you can't find make this solid and this seem real? And what they're discovering is that it is just thought. It's there because I think it's there. And because I think it's there, I'm going to find it. Not because it's there, because I think it's there.
The very act of observing it makes it so,
Yes, you
manifest.
are what you think.
Correct.
And you say it's a view, the truth is true. I mean,
Yes,
I do agree that there are tons and tons of people that are knowing that it's illusionary, but